Hi, I'm Nancy Giordano. I describe my work as a strategic futurist. I own a boutique, what we call a strategic inspiration company called Play Big Inc. And in that we do consulting, we create events. I do a fair amount of speaking about how to bridge the gap between where we are now and where the future is headed.
It's different in the United States than it is in other countries.
You know, strategic futurist is just a way of trying to describe that it's not just about being able to label the future and tell stories about the future or imagine the future. It's really about building a meaningful pathway between here and there. So there are two questions that I orient all my work around, which is what does the future need and expect of us? And then what are we each in a unique position to create and contribute to that future? If we can really just work on those two things, then the future doesn't feel so overwhelming, doesn't feel so daunting, and I think it gives us a pretty good compass for how we need to spend our time, energies, resources, equities, expertise, passions, curiosities, etc.
Years and years ago, right, you would say, well, we can't predict the future. With exponential technology, some say you can, others still maintain you can't. So just walk me through what you do, considering all of those things.
I know, right? We're losing track of how much is being created and how much we've got access to. And so I do think a vital capacity for the future is curiosity and really spending time learning from others and from, there's just so much. I mean, that's the good news, right? There's plenty, you can learn about anything you want to learn about. And it's also, I think, about building a community or building a tribe or a network of other people that are also curious, that are also learning, that you can share with. There's no one person who's going to be able to know everything. And I was recently talking to executives as part of a big pharmaceutical company that are building a center of excellence that will be delivering personalized healthcare. Like, it's very exciting to see the people who are actually delivering the thing that we're all hoping for, right? And he and I had a great chat about when you're building these teams. Like, he may really focus on delivery through blockchain or distributed web, and somebody else will spend time with artificial intelligence, and somebody else will spend some time with something else, and they'll bring that collective learning and intelligence together. The key is not to dismiss somebody else's area of expertise because you don't know about it, right? So you may really be passionate about this, but then dismiss that one, and I think that's the danger. If we can't know it all, we have to trust that we're in tribes where other people are bringing theirs, and that what they're advocating for has as much validity as what we might be advocating for. So it's really building, I think, a different way of how we learn and share. I encourage competitors to learn together. They don't have to create together, but they should learn together.
What does competition look like in the future?
What we're seeing already is competition is much more collaborative, right? We're seeing, it's so interesting, one of the things I talk about one of my talks is uncommon partnerships. So partly it's that you can find like Pizza Hut partnering with Toyota to put together an autonomous driving pizza van that will bring a hot pizza to my house, right? So those sort of just like crazy collaborations. Then you've got people who have unaligned expertise, but for some reason when they come together are a really powerful whole. So when we saw Amazon and Berkshire Hathaway and JP Morgan decide to put a healthcare company together, right? They brought these amazing intelligences and backgrounds together. But you also see, which I think is really fascinating, that Honda just invested $2.75 billion in autonomous technology developed by General Motors, an entity called Cruise, which GM smartly set up so they could take investment that didn't seem competitive with the other portion of their business. So people, I think, are just putting really different structures together, and I think this whole idea about what is competitive is going to look really, really different moving forward.
At what point in your career or life did you decide this is what you wanted to do, and why?
I've always wanted to get closer to the point of impact. I've always been curious about why something happens, and I wanted to understand it better, and I realized at one point in my career, I had this great career at advertising agencies, building really beautiful big brands, having all the tools and resources at our disposal to create stories. And then you realized that when technologies like TiVo or DVRs were coming in, it was going to change the whole game. You're like, wait a second, it's a whole different thing. And I wasn't going to look to a brand for the ads, I was going to look to the brand for its values and how those were expressed. So I started getting deeper into that. Well, the only way that really makes sense is to understand, well, the context that that brand exists in. And then it's not about the brand, it's about actually the industry. And then it's about, it just keeps mushrooming. And so the questions have become more interesting, the challenge is bigger. And really, even then, I can go into most organizations, this is going to sound so obnoxious, but with the right team, we have an amazing team of people I partner with, and we can answer most really challenging questions about how to do blank and how to fend off this, how to build that. But what we found is that most organizations, even if you put it on a silver platter with a bow and a dancing cabaret, don't believe it, don't adopt it, don't have a culture that's able to absorb and respond to new information, which is super frustrating. right? And I also feel as though if they still think the world is flat and we believe that the world is round, because we're spending so much more time out in the future, right? We're on the horizon, we can see the curve. They're building very limited solutions on top of that.
What are some of the things they bring up when they're trying to explain their argument to
Well,
you?
part of it, they've been around often for over 100 years, right? So I was just reminded earlier today that I got the brilliant opportunity to talk to 32 executives from around the world from one of the largest retailers in the world, a brand that we would all have a lot of reverence for. And there was a slide that I put it very casually that just said, brand survival is not guaranteed. And they all took a photo of that slide. I'm like, how can that be new news? But again, if you've grown up in an organization that has significant amount of history and prowess, confidence, and hubris, right? Because I do find plenty of those companies that also have that. They can't imagine that they wouldn't be around, forget 100 years, 10 years, 50 years, 10 years, 5 years. They just can't imagine it would be disrupted that quickly. So I think that there's a certain amount of just disbelief that things that feel so solid right now are actually much more tenuous. I think they've also, most of the people who are running organizations right now ascended to that position because they were really good at running a playbook. Right? How can we replicate the success of the past and do it more and more efficiency? We were taught things like Six Sigma and TQM and Kaizen and just more and more and more efficient, and we'll be able to take that and scale it consistently around the world. And many big brands were built that way until it changed. Right? And so all of a sudden if it changes and you have grown up and you now are leading organizations with that, training, it's really scary to completely undo it.
What is the right team for the future?
Everyone wants to know what this will look like in the future, wants a definitive answer, and we don't have it, right? So what we're developing are capacities to navigate and to learn and to intuit and to take action and then to iterate on that and to see what the next version of it is. There is no defined state. So I do think diverse teams, really as diverse as you can build that team in terms of everything, in terms of age, in terms of gender, in terms of background, in terms of curiosity, again, in terms of mixing artists with ethicists, with technologists, with people who are good at logistics and people who are good at design. Who knows? But I do think the more diverse the team, the better. Someone described recently, I think it was actually at a Singularity event, that when you have shared values, you can have as much diversity as you want. Really, you need to have something that unites you. So whether it is a shared mission or a set of shared values, then you can build a really extraordinarily robust and wide team. So I think that's something that's often overlooked. And age actually is becoming a big portion of that conversation as well. A friend of mine, Chip Conley, just wrote a book called Wisdom at Work and has really startling stats about this gap that we've got going right now in age. And I found that there's an entrepreneur who just left a big giant corporation, left Unilever to start a specialty foods company, and he's only hiring people over 50 because he feels as though he can get them at a better rate. He can offer them equity in the company, and they've got enough money to be able to take that deal. And overall, they just just a love fest.
Do you see a future where there will be still a place for people who hold deep values, whether conservative or not? Do you still see them playing a role at the table?
There's a question about whether or not we think it's a conservative, progressive issue, or whether or not we think it's an economic issue. Because I think that there are lots of different ways you can slice up how people have differences and feelings about it. So I focus more on the economic because I think that's where there is more legit fear. I think the stuff that has to do more with cultural values, we can spend, if we just ever could figure out how to build community again and talk to each other again, we'd be in better shape. The economic stuff is real. That one is harder to just say magic wand and go have a beer together, and it's cool that you don't have a job and I do. So I think a lot about how do we build better social scaffolding for a future that will change everything about what work looks like. And I think even this conversation about what we believe work is and how important work is contextual to the country that you're in. It's not the same all around the world. And in the United States, we have this, we've tied so much value to whether or not you have a job or a type of job, and including your health insurance, and including your social status, and including some of the other things. But again, maybe because I'm a woman, maybe it's different. I have 4 roles on the planet, only one of which are paid, right? So when you think about what else I do on the planet, I would argue that the other 3 are probably more valuable than the one that I get paid for. We have an abundance of possibility of ways to spend our time and have meaning. Does it really need to be tied to an economic paycheck in which I expend energy for somebody else? Which, by the way, 70% of people are miserable in their work anyway. So we're trying to hold on to a system that isn't making people happy. So imagine a social scaffolding, whether it is, again, universal basic income or some other income redistribution thing that might be distributed. My friends don't believe in sort of the centralized version of that. They want the distributed version of that. Is it that we get to get remunerated for our data or for nano transactions of any kind, right? If we do distributed hosting and I'm able to share, some of my excess capacity for some of your apps, I can get paid for that. My friends are working on cryptocurrency solutions for that would create a really different way of what we call social coordination and being able to identify, create, and compensate for value. Society could look really different in that world, right? But it means really letting go of a lot of these mindsets that we have built in around competition, around value, around work. My only fear, honestly, is that we are going to be really slow in adopting the new mindset that it will take to be able to embrace the abundant possibility.
When you say slow, do you think on a global scale or just U.S.?
I think it's like anything else, like trying to take a blanket and give you, I can't take a blanket until I give you the rattle. People are, I think, suffer from a lack of imagination about what is possible. And a lack of faith in themselves and each other, which I think is really frightening, right? When people imagine the worst case scenario of something like a universal basic income, they really have a really dark view of humanity, and I don't. If I can just say, we did a TEDx event, so I've run 6 TEDx events with teenagers, co-created with them, and this past year, they wanted the theme to be discomfort zone, because they felt 2 things: a lack of resilience inside themselves and being able to take chances, and I get chills when I think about it, a safe way, and I don't mean like safe as in like non-triggered, but meaning like in a respectful way to have a discussion in which you disagree with someone. They watched what happened at Google when someone wrote a memo who felt as though there had been some bias that wasn't being paid attention to, and watched that whole thing go down in flames in a way that they thought was really unfair. Yes, there were some paragraphs in his, they read the whole 10 pages, these kids. And there are a couple paragraphs you could definitely argue with or enlighten somebody on, but they felt like the whole thing had become just way too hot, way too, whatever that word is. And they worry about that, and they want to be able to feel as though they're in an environment where they can have a difference of opinion and not be shut down so abruptly.
That's hopeful that you mentioned that the newer generation sees a room for compassion or a need for compassion and open dialogue.
I have now 2 boys that are in university, and one in a more conservative university, one in a super liberal university, and I worry more for the one that's in the super liberal one, because that's one where, like, who knows, like something gets set somebody off in some way, right? And so you're sending your child to the school trying to protect them, not about grades and not about, make sure you lock your stuff in your dorm room and like whatever, but like really significant things that they are on guard for in a way that we never had to be. When on my grid of things that I'm fearful of and frustrated by, I'm fearful of breeding a generation of kids that are really anxious right now and don't feel safe in this future. And I have a women's group that I put together, and we had a long conversation recently about resilience in teens, and we can point to a whole bunch of different things. I point to that we do not often share a positive narrative of the future, and so they often hear about the apocalypse of this and the jobs of that, and the robots are going to do this, and we're not going to have money, and they're going to have the haves and have-nots. And I mean, I literally did a middle school career fair one day, and the kids were telling me that that's how it's going to go down. I'm like, you're 13, no, and I don't believe that. I really don't. And so I'm developing a career fair of the future for teens and college kids. It'll be, we'll pilot a very small version of it, but in a partnership with South by Southwest or simultaneous to South by. If anyone wants to say anything to a kid, just tell them that. And it doesn't matter if they want to open a shoe store. They do not have to solve world poverty, right? They can make regular decisions and still add to the value of the planet, and it will be important that they do that. And I think if we could get that message out more authentically and encouragingly, we would see a drop in anxiety and depression and, God forbid, suicide.
If you could briefly describe, what does the career fair of the future look like? I can't even imagine that it would look anything like what we see.
First of all, it's a name. This is where I'm a lousy entrepreneur. I'm sure everybody on this video is going to send me like 37 names that will be better than what I've got. But it really is a discussion about what the world of work would look like and jobs look like. And so because kids have short attention spans, and it is a Sunday in the middle of exams, and there's a bunch of other stuff going on, we were programming it to be 4 short modules, about 90 minutes, in which we will have someone like a Pascal or me or someone set the big stage, but only for 7 to 10 minutes. Like, it is not a 30-minute talk. About the vastness of what is possible, and then we will pick a theme for each one. So the first will probably be the future of civic life. So imagine what cities will look like, governance could look like, food would look like. What does it mean to live in 20 years from now? What will vertical farming be like? Will we have smart roads? It was really interesting. I was talking to another Singularity member yesterday about his view of mobility, and he wants dumb cities so that we actually have smart technology, which is fascinating. So just that kind of conversation for about 25 minutes. Then we're going to have the kids break into tables with mentors and start to imagine all the jobs that would be created in that world. So you imagine that's the way that civic life would look. What are some of the jobs that would exist, either that still exist now but might take a different form, or new jobs that would be created that no one ever thought of before, or work. And again, I don't know that I will think of them as jobs as much as roles, because I think that we will have roles instead of jobs. And then I want to flip it so that then there's a youth panel. So then I actually want to hear from 5 or 6 kids that were at each of those tables and had ahas, and I want grown-ups to listen to the kids. I think part of, again, was feeding kids anxiety, my belief, is that they sense on some limbic level that their education is not preparing them for the future. And their parents certainly make them feel that. Certainly in high-educated, high-income families, there is a tremendous amount of panic around that conversation about making sure you really get all your APs done and study really hard to be able to get to that university and into that program. And I just think that it doesn't have to have so much weight. Now imagine I'm a futurist mom. I'm raising 3 kids at the exact same time that all this conversation is going on, and I fall into it too. My kids are in competitive high school and take all the classes, right? But I keep remembering that Steve Jobs dropped out of school, right, and really followed his curiosity. Now, again, I'm sure plenty of kids have done that and not created the most valuable company on the world. But I do think that if we allow kids to have a bit more leeway and more agency, right? So there are 4 things that I think we need to cultivate in kids, which is curiosity, empathy, agency, and grit. And if we actually really programmed for those 4, we'd have really, really great kids.
As an entrepreneur, you're a woman and you're a mother. How have you balanced all of that? How has been that experience for you?
I don't know how I got there, partly because I was probably raised by a single mom, even though she had her own very dramatic issues, and maybe because I sort of back-ended into a women's college, which I didn't expect to go to. But I somehow have been very lucky to have a significant amount of confidence. So I inadvertently ended up as the breadwinner, the primary breadwinner in our family, when my husband at the time sort of got caught in one of those dot-com bubbles, and his skills didn't match up again. And all of a sudden I was shocked to be there. And so what did I do? I quit my job. First of all, I negotiated 4 days a week prior to that. I always worked 4 days a week, so I would have 1 day a week to be with my children, because it just gave me mental health. I mean, I still worked 60 hours, but at least I had that 1 day that I knew I could do with what I needed to. And we're seeing now more and more companies make that possible, but for both men and women, that there's more flex time, which I think is great. And then the second is, when it really got scary for me, I quit, which I know seems completely counterintuitive, but I somehow held enough faith that I would be able to create value with my own thinking and my own resources than to be inside a machine that at any moment could fire me.
How does an entrepreneur who, because of exponential technology, they just do not see a future of their business, okay? It's gonna die, and that is a reality, okay? And how can they remain optimistic?
Right. I think there's a whole part about also going in and not expecting all the answers to be out there. I don't think all the answers are out there, and I don't think someone's got a rule book that you don't have. So I do think that getting sort of deeper and more connected with who you are, self-awareness is a really critical, again, capacity for being able to navigate this future. When I worked for an artificial intelligence company and we were thinking about our hiring metrics, right, there was a certain amount of aptitude and attitude and ability to play nice with others, but really self-awareness was critical, because you can't confidently, again, manage ambiguity or really dynamic environments if you don't know who you are. So I do think getting much clearer about who you are, learning to manage stress. There's so many tools that you can do that. I didn't sleep very well last night, and I put on a Google, sleeping meditations, easy. So there are ways I think that we can learn to manage this stuff better. Again, I go back to community and being in conversation with people and looking for the opportunity. So I don't know how, again, societal models are going to shift, and if the same models of capitalism and the way that we've been making money and distributing wealth is going to look the same. I really don't know. But I know that people are working in some really cool stuff that I would argue is very entrepreneurial. I would really look at the distributed web. When the web doesn't look the same way it looks now, and it is distributed, and we actually hold on to our own apps, and we hold on to our own data, and we collaborate in a really different way, what will that look like, and what will the opportunities be? We had no idea when the web came out that there would be an Airbnb, and there would be Lyft, and there would be Google Maps, and there would be all these apps that came out of that. What will the architecture of a distributed web look like? Worth pondering.
What are some of the business opportunities that you see opening up?
Distributed web definitely excites me. Vertical farming. When I start to imagine what we can create with food, this is the thing I was telling the kids on career day. You start to imagine that energy costs, really the most expensive part of creating food in a vertical way these days is energy costs. So if we can bring down energy costs because we can harness abundant sunlight and we can do whatever, we don't use as much water, we use resources, we can grow things at 10 times the rate, we can then take that and make plant-based foods, and so I can have a lot more protein that isn't made necessarily from an animal. If I was going to open a company today, I'd open like a vertical farming thing. I would open collaborative housing. I think we're going to, this loneliness epidemic is real. We need to think about how we build spaces that create more connection and conversation and potentially living for people that are multi-generational and that have a completely different form instead of a single family house. So there's lots.